NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village Senior Living in Westfield, offering assisted living and compass memory support with evidence-based treatment for those with memory loss. More at armbrookvillage.com.
Welcome to the Fabulous 413. I'm Khalees Smith.
And I'm Monty Belmonte. Later in the show, we will embrace race with the Amherst couple behind the organization and podcast Embrace Race. We'll hear about their mission to support parents, educators, and other caregivers who are working to raise children who are thoughtful, informed, and brave about race so that U.S. multiracial democracy can thrive. And we'll hear about the new exhibit they've co-created at the Mead Art Museum at Amherst College.
And as Monty and the marchers prepare for the 15th annual March for the Food Bank next week, we'll delve deeper into the dramatics behind the event. Monty will be marching as both Elphaba and Glinda from Wicked, and Monty's going to get greenified and get a makeup tutorial from the man who designed the makeup for Broadway, former Greenfield resident Joe DeLude II. But first, we'll hear from one of the loudest voices in the anti-hunger movement in America, who just so happens to be going on the march next week.
How are you?
Good. Are you ready?
I'm ready, set, go.
Time for our weekly check-in with U.S. Congressman from the 2nd Congressional District of Massachusetts, Worcester's own Congressman Jim McGovern, who, among other things, is a marcher for the food bank and will be once again joining us this Monday and Tuesday as many of us walk some or all of the 43 miles between Springfield and Greenfield over 2 days to raise money and awareness for the food bank of Western Mass, something that I think you've been going on, Congressman, now for close to 10 years, maybe even more than of the 10 years.
Yeah, I think it's probably been a little bit more, but I don't remember the exact time we started. But it's an important thing to do. This march helps feed countless people in our community, and that's a good thing. And I hope that everybody will not only follow us, but I hope some of them will join with us, and I hope everybody will donate something. It's going to be an important 2 days.
Well, we're going to dial into hunger, I think, a little bit, but let's do like a lightning round of politics first, because you were front page of the Huffington Post yesterday. Democrat torches Trump picks as beyond insane in brutal House floor rant. Representative Jim McGovern, Democrat of Massachusetts, said Tuesday that the selection, quote, would be funny if it weren't so sad, adding, "This is the dream team." Really, what's your take on the increasingly television-oriented cabinet picks for the incoming administration?
Yeah, it's nuts. I mean, I don't know what else to say. I mean, Matt Gaetz is Attorney General. I mean, he's being investigated for sex trafficking and paying off women for sex. And you got, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., who, I mean, he's every once in a while he'll say something that makes sense, but then he says something like drinking tap water makes you gay. And you start to wonder, like, really? He should be the head of Health and Human Services. And Tulsi Gabbard, who I serve with, I mean, I have nothing but friendly relations with her, but I mean, she's kind of gone off the deep end, and there's a concern about whether or not some of our nation's most top secrets will be shared with our adversaries. And I mean, go on, Dr. Oz. I mean, I don't. This doesn't make any sense. This is not about good governance.
I wonder if Donald Trump believes these people are the right people because they are on television, because he watches so much television, and because he came from television. It's very confounding how many have television connections.
But that doesn't make you qualified to be the head of an agency. Look, he wants to bypass FBI background checks. He's mad at the Senate for wanting to do confirmation hearings. We'll see whether the Senate stands up to him. And we're just going to have to see how it all plays out. I hope that the United States Senate has a spine and will at the very least insist on confirmation hearings and a vote up or down on these nominees.
Meanwhile, somebody that seems like we've all forgotten about, the President of the United States, Joe Biden, seems to have changed course when it comes to strategies with conflicts abroad, especially in Ukraine. That seems to be escalating. Seems the president has taken the reins off Zelensky, allowing them to fire rockets into Russia proper. Russia now retaliating with intercontinental ballistic missiles. Meanwhile, the U.S. ambassador to the UN vetoing a Security Council resolution for a ceasefire in Gaza yesterday, while the International Criminal Court has arrest warrants out for Benjamin Netanyahu. Is this foreign policy strategy a wise use of the last 2 months of the Biden presidency?
Well, I've been critical of Biden for sending anti-personnel landmines to Ukraine. I've spent my whole career fighting against them. I think what he's doing by sending anti-personnel landmines is giving Trump the green light to do what he tried to do in his first term, and that is bring back landmines and send them all over the world. So I think that's a bad thing. And look, I was hoping after the election he would have, again, relied on U.S. law and suspended aid to Israel because Israel is out of compliance with U.S. law. They are still blocking humanitarian aid into Gaza. I don't know what his end game is here, but again, the violence and the killing continues, and I regret that very much. I joined with a bunch of colleagues in the House, sending a statement to the Senate urging them to support Senator Sanders' amendment on joint resolution of disapproval of the weapon sales that have been already provided to Netanyahu. The Senate voted on that last night. I think 17 people voted with Senator Sanders. I mean, that's not as big as I wanted, but it still nonetheless shows some movement in a direction that I think embraces ending military assistance and embracing a ceasefire now.
Speaking with U.S. Congressman Jim McGovern, who will join us on the March for the Food Bank on Monday and Tuesday of this next week. Let's talk about hunger and the federal response to hunger, something that you, week in and week out, go to the floor of Congress and talk about. Sure. There was a little bit of bipartisan movement for something that I know you've cared about for a long time. There was a food as medicine resolution that passed that would encourage medical institutions to teach nutrition as part of the course of study to become a doctor. I mean, and you mentioned RFK Jr. He does sometimes bring up things that sound very much like the things that you've advocated for a long time, to the point where when you posted that the resolution passed, every MAGA person came out and thought you were a Johnny-come-lately to this issue, saying, we already have a health czar who's coming, RFK Jr. Are there other areas like this that you see potential in with the incoming administration where something could pass that you believe in, that you think would actually help and change as we try to end hunger in this nation?
Well, I am nervous about what the next 2 years, maybe 4 years will bring, because all indications is that these guys want to end up cutting nutrition programs. And I've been critical of RFK Jr. on this issue because you can't have it both ways. You can't say that we need to make sure people have access to good food and then support a guy who wants to slash the budgets for SNAP and for other nutrition programs, Head Start. I mean, there's waiting lines right now at Meals on Wheels. If you want to do this, then you do it. If you just want to talk about things that sound nice, but you don't want to do anything to make it happen, well, I don't really have a lot of patience for that. We'll see. I mean, if there's areas of agreement, or bipartisan cooperation, I'm all in. But if they're going to try to cut these budgets, if they're going to try to deny people in this country, the richest country in the history of the world, food, then I'm going to fight like hell against them. But we're going to show up for every single vote, and we're going to fight for what we believe in, and we're not going to throw away our conscience just to get along with these guys.
2 years ago, Congressman, you were able to convince the Biden administration, after failing with the Obama administration, to convene the first-in-a-generation White House Conference on Hunger, Nutrition, and Health. There are still, to this day, 2 years later, different cohorts that are discussing issues that came out of that conference. Is there movement on any of those issues that you feel like are a possibility in a bipartisan way that the conference addressed? The conference, which was ostensibly a bipartisan conference as well.
Well, with the conference, there's lots of stuff happening in various departments and agencies in the government right now. But one of the things that needs to happen is Congress needs to appropriate adequate resources to move forward on others. And we need to be working more diligently. You mentioned food as medicine at the beginning. Our medical institutions do not need to wait for Congress. They can start moving in this direction already. They can be talking about food prescriptions. They can be talking about cooking classes. They can be talking about providing better quality food for their employees. And medical schools, don't need us to require them to teach nutrition as one of the major courses that medical students have to take. They can do that. We're going to try to pass bills to force those Johnny-come-latelys, but we need to move in that direction. But here's the deal. You cannot end hunger in this country if you're going to cut SNAP. You cannot end hunger in this country if you're going to underfund Meals on Wheels, or if you're not going to underfund Head Start, or if you're going to underfund WIC. You just can't do it. You're going to make things worse. By making it worse, not only is that a betrayal of what our job is to serve the people, but you're also going to create a whole bunch of other costs, avoidable healthcare costs. I mean, it's kids who don't learn in school, workers who are less productive in the workplace, senior citizens taking medication on an empty stomach. This is what we have to be concerned about as we enter these next couple of years. And I'm ready for this fight, which brings me to the march that we're doing. For people like me who are disappointed with what happened and who feel that some of the policies that this new administration are going to embrace are things that betray our values, you got to do something positive. The positive thing to do is to be part of this march for the Food Bank of Western Mass, because this is real. Every dollar that is raised will provide somebody in our community who needs food, the basic nutrition that they deserve. And, hunger, I think, is a human rights crime. Food ought to be viewed as a fundamental human right. And that's what this march is all about. It's about making sure that people's human rights are respected and people have access to good, nutritious food.
Congressman, you've been addressing issues of hunger on the federal level for many, many years now. What's something you want people who believe the government should have no role in this to know? That charity should be the way that this issue is resolved?
Well, charity hasn't resolved this. It is important that we support charitable efforts, but that in itself is not enough. We're a big country. We have 47 million people who don't know where the next meal is going to come from. We need all hands on deck. Yeah, we need charitable organizations. We need businesses to actually step up and do more. But we need government to make sure that nobody falls through the cracks. That's the problem right now, is that too many people in this country, even with the social safety net we have, are falling through the cracks. And to people who are, I don't believe we should expand SNAP, I will remind them that the average SNAP benefit is about $2.04 per person per meal. Yeah, you go out and try to figure out how you eat a semi-nutritious meal or how you eat anything on that kind of a budget. There's false impression out there that somehow there's this overly generous benefit that, people can take advantage of and they don't have to work or do anything to get it. The bottom line is the majority of people on this benefit work. They are working, but they earn so little that they still are eligible for SNAP. And what they're eligible for is that, on average of about $2.04 per person per meal. We are failing them on the national level in terms of providing what is necessary. And we have to make sure we don't go backwards. But in the meantime, marches like the one that you will lead on Monday and Tuesday are so, so important, because nobody in this country, nobody on this planet, quite frankly, but certainly nobody in this country with all of the resources we have should ever have to wonder whether they can feed their kids. And depending on how much we raise, it is going to provide a lot more food security and economic security to people in our community. I think that's a worthy thing to do. I think that it is worth all the pain that some of us will feel 2 days afterwards. But look, I don't have to wake up in the morning wondering whether or not I can put food on the table for my kids. I'm lucky. And so there are many of us who are lucky. Look, I just came back from El Salvador. I spoke at the 35th anniversary of the murder of the 6 Jesuit priests at the University of Central America. And back in 1989, I investigated those killings, and we exposed that the Salvadoran military was responsible for it, and who were trained by the United States and armed by the United States. But I said in my speech at the university, I said, one of the things that I appreciate about those Jesuits, who I knew before they were killed, was that their mission was that we need to stand with the poor and the marginalized. That is what we all have an obligation to do. And they did, and they were sadly killed for it in El Salvador. But I have a lot of colleagues who get on the floor and they talk about their faith and they talk about their religion. And I'm reminded that, faith without action is nothing. If we want to do something meaningful during this Thanksgiving holiday, this is the place to be. And by the way, it's fun. You dress up. I don't know what you're going to dress up as.
Well, yeah, I already told you I'm going to be the witches from Wicked. I'm going to be
that's right. Oh, that's right.
Glinda one day and Elphaba the next day. I thought you were going to get a flying monkey costume.
No, I will not. I will cheer you on. I'll try to sing some of the lyrics from the show.
Oh, good.
But anyway,
that'll be fun.
But the point I'm trying to make is this is important stuff, and the need is great, and we can make a real difference in our community. And hopefully the gathering and all the generosity that we will see in the next few days, it will be contagious, and others in the state and others throughout the country will follow. But this is really, really important. So everybody who's listening here, please, please, please You don't have to do 43 miles. You can march with us for a half an hour. If you can't march, you can call in with a donation and you can help the food bank of Western Massachusetts, which means you're helping people in our community, people that you see each and every day.
You'll be getting updates from the road here on 88.5 throughout the course of the 2 days on Monday and Tuesday. You can also listen on my former station, my alma mater, 93.9 The River, who's so generously still supporting this event. You can find out all the details about the march at nepm.org/hunger, or you can go straight to the food bank's website, foodbankwma.org, and learn about the details, where we'll be. There's a tracker that is in my shopping cart that I know the government is looking at, but also you can find out exactly where we'll be, when, and find us en route. You can find a team, you can support a team, and it is all going to make sure that the over 100,000 people in Western Mass that the food bank serves every month will know where their next meal is coming from. Looking forward to seeing you on Monday and Tuesday, Congressman. I haven't checked the weather yet. I don't let myself do that usually until the weekend before the march, but I got my fingers crossed that this drought will work in our favor.
I'll light a candle that it's not cold and it's not raining.
Yeah, cold I can deal with. The rain and cold is just too much.
Yeah, I look forward to seeing you.
All right, well, we'll kick it all off at 7 a.m. at Martin Luther King Jr. Family Services in Springfield, and it'll go for 2 days until we hit Greenfield in the town common. Thanks as always, Congressman. We'll see you at the march on Monday morning.
All the best.
Later in the show, Monty will get green with the guy who designed the makeup for so many Broadway shows, including Beetlejuice, the MJ musical, and Wicked. Joe DeLude II, he's going to show Monty how to greenify himself as he gets dressed up for the March for the Food Bank number 15.
But first, we'll hear from the Amherst couple who've spent the last 8 years building resources for parents and other people who want to have honest conversations about race. They've just completed the first season of their corresponding podcast and have a new exhibit at the Mead Art Museum in Amherst. Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas from Embrace Race join us next.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by UMass Amherst School of Public Policy, offering graduate programs in public affairs, public policy and administration, data analytics, and computational social science. umass.edu/SPP.
So I grew up right around the corner from here. It was like, we took the Bernie exit, and I was
She
like,
got all misty.
I was like, oh my gosh, Bernie.
The Embrace Race podcast brings you the best and latest advice on how to guide kids through race through informative conversations with researchers and practitioners. And this season, they have countered long-standing myths about race and kids and talk about how kids actually learn about race.
The podcast is hosted by co-parents and Embrace Race co-directors Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas, who are based in Amherst. Melissa has spent a lifetime trying to center the voices, experiences, and concerns of children and families with a particular interest in immigrant kids of color. She is the multiracial daughter of immigrants from Dominica and Quebec.
Professionally, Melissa has sought to empower marginalized kids and families, first as an elementary school educator, teaching in bilingual programs in a predominantly Mexican and Mexican-American neighborhood in Chicago, then as an NPR producer in D.C., driven to recruit voices and perspectives from communities of color in the newsroom and teaching them how to use these microphones that we were talking about, it being very sensitive at times, I'm sure, with NPR. And later as a radio reporter who collaborated with her former elementary students as they were coming of age to capture the experiences of living biculturally for NPR. But Melissa has roots right here in the 413 from Springfield.
Andrew is dad to two amazing kids, a partner to Melissa, an only child, a longtime racial justice guy, a black man of Jamaican origins in the United States, born on the 4th of July. Well, for real.
For real.
For real.
I wouldn't lie about a thing like that.
He has worked with the Harvard Civil Rights Project, the Kirwan Institute for the Study of Race and Ethnicity, and the Proteus Fund.
The Embrace Race podcast had just finished its first season, and apart from the podcast, they've made available a bevy of resources for people, including all their biography information, which we stole, especially for parents who are doing anti-racist work. They also have a partnership at Amherst College with the Representing Art Beyond the Color Line exhibit. It's a fabulous podcast. I got to listen to at least half of it.
Thank you.
And as a parent of 3 kids, it seems to me to be an invaluable resource for people that are concerned about this, especially as we're entering into a time, it seems, where this is not something that may be explicitly addressed in the classrooms, if it ever was, for much longer.
Or perhaps explicitly prohibited from being in classrooms.
We don't know what's going to happen, right? We don't know, although we have some hints, and we've been here before in some way, right?
Well, we know, for 3 years now at least, there have been a slew of measures across the country that have prohibited engagement with kids on race. Yeah, no, it's already here.
Yeah.
The question is, how much worse will it become?
People have already lost jobs, like people have been put on leave for
Absolutely.
engaging these conversations too.
And lots of people just intimidated into silence.
I think one of the really interesting and important conversations that your whole endeavor brings up is how to do this outside of the classroom, because no matter what your kids learn in school, like some of that has to come home and be continued.
We started Embrace Race in early 2016. It had been an idea of ours a couple years before while our kids were going through preschool and kindergarten. And actually, we sort of came up with the idea locally in our kids' preschool at the Common School, because we had these parent groups where we would get together and talk about race and parenting and all the things that we were experiencing. And we realized very quickly in organizing it that there weren't a lot of resources for parents. You know, there were a lot of organizations and resources aimed at schools, but there weren't a lot of things outside of 101 articles that were mostly geared at white kids, you know, like how to talk to your kids about this recent shooting, and not necessarily taking into consideration that your kid might be from a targeted group, you know, and that will be a different conversation. But for the most part, there really weren't articles for parents. And a huge gap we saw is that kids start to get their ideas about race, you know, before they can talk, before they can communicate in huge paragraphs about race. And it's what they're seeing and they're putting together, who their caregivers are, who the inner circle is, who their caregivers hug and hold in regard, you know, all kinds of things. And there weren't resources that we could find really attending to that.
And we met a lot of people, right? Both fellow parents, teachers, who wanted that information, right? They wanted to do the work, but they didn't know how to do the work. Between those two things, and then certainly the presidential campaign of 2016 lifted up a lot more issues. The Southern Poverty Law Center in spring of 2016 did a survey of 2,000 teachers and found that those teachers reported that there was, you know, much more agitation in their classrooms, right? Many more kids who were harassing other kids, echoing what they were hearing in the presidential campaign, and then lots of undocumented immigrant kids who were terrified that they were going to be deported. We were seeing it very close to home, and it was being documented across the country.
Andrew and I have, you know, thought about race professionally, personally for a long time. But when we had kids, it kind of freaked us out, you know, to realize like, ooh, you know, we have to have these conversations, and it's, you know, they're growing up in a different place, in a different time. Their identities are a bit different. And we didn't feel just emotionally quite ready to do it. And it gave us so much sort of fortitude to have those conversations with other parents and just not feel alone. It's not because we suck that these things are happening or our kids are even repeating problematic things. It's because there are a lot of messages out there and we're here to guide them, and we are not the only ones. Right. So we really did start this organization in part to help people like ourselves as well.
We're speaking with Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas, who are the co-parents and co-directors of Embrace Race. The first season of their podcast has completed this year. And the way that what I love about the way the podcast is laid out is the myths that you bust. It's like the Mythbusters television show, but for racism. And these are really important topics that I think people often think about. A lot of them have to do with colorblindness, in quotes, but also about the ideas, things like if you are aspiring to be not racist parent, you will have not racist kids. Talking about race makes you racist. These are the huge things that come up that young kids don't see race, that babies don't see, or they're born, you know, not racist. You go into depth in all of these topics and bring in experts from all sorts of different places to address these myths. How did you come up with the myths that you wanted to focus on for this first season?
Yeah, so first, we definitely think that babies are not born racist. So I just
Right.
want to be clear that people understand that.
Yeah.
As Melissa said before, what happens is the journey toward racial understanding starts very, very early. So we know, for example, that at 3 months old, babies can distinguish between skin colors, right, between hair textures and so on. They respond differently to the language they're familiar with versus the language they're not familiar with. So that's the start of the road. It's definitely not about racism at that point, right? It's, there's no animus attached. And they're clearly not thinking in terms of race the way adults think about race.
Right.
But it starts there. And actually by kindergarten, right, most kindergartners have the same kind of racial attitudinal profile that adults do, right? They don't hold it as strongly, but they have, right, it looks very similar. And that does include animus toward some, a sense of some groups are better than others, smarter than others, that sort of thing. We say, yes, it's about raising a good human being, as many of us understand that. But it's also about what kind of society are we going to be? What kind of multiracial society and multiracial democracy are we going to be?
Democracy.
Yeah, I mean, and I love that phrase, and this is kind of the first year that I've heard that rise to the top like cream when we talked about anti-democratic. It's like, can we build a multiracial democracy? And we are wrestling with this as a nation right now, where the people in charge don't want to talk about these things that you are addressing in these myths. And we're talking about the Embrace Race podcast with its creators, Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas. And one of the things that I took away from this as a parent is, am I providing enough context for my children, or do I assume they are understanding these things in the way that I understand them as a grown-up?
We talk about adults in the lives of children, which is all of us really doing this work. And it's absolutely true that we find, because there's so much counter information to sort of how actually race works and how what the research tells us, that a lot of adults, have no idea or have bought the myths. So adults need the education as well, right, in their lives, and a lot of them are getting it late if they're getting it. And what you said, Monty, about are your kids understanding, it's absolutely true. Kids metabolize this stuff very differently and are taking in different things. And so one mistake we parents make a lot, one is the mistake I make, I'll tell you all, is talking way too much. Like there was someone who told me parents should talk 85% less, and I think they were talking about me. So a really
Good thing you have a podcast.
Yeah, right. But a really important point with these conversations is actually to make them conversations and to sit down and understand kids are understanding the world a bit differently. They like to categorize people into groups. They'll come to different conclusions using kid logic. So you don't want to jump down their throats when they have opinions or express them that you don't agree with. You want to say, well, what do you think? What are you noticing? Why do you think that? And then you'll really understand a bit better where they're coming from and where they're getting tripped up. And definitely don't assume, as many parents do, that they hold the same values that you do just because they live in the house with you. There are so many messages coming in from so many other places, which is why when kids say problematic things to you, you cannot hush it up and just be embarrassed because they must have gotten it from you. No, they didn't have to get it from you at all.
Yeah.
So many people in the United States think the crucial question is whether or not they observe race at all, right? That the problem is to notice, right? To notice skin color, to notice whatever. That's not the problem. That's guaranteed, right? That over time, like we are pattern recognition machines, right? At any age, right? They will notice skin color. They will notice, by the way, right? What are the 3 things that we notice about each other within a split second of meeting? Perceived gender, perceived race, perceived age.
Yeah.
Within a split second, right? If you're listening to this, think about the last casual encounter you had, right, at the supermarket, someone you don't know. Really good bet that you will remember those 3 things, right? Or at least your guesses at those 3 things.
Yeah.
So the issue is not the observation, right? The issue is what sense do you make of the observation? So if, for example, you go through one neighborhood, that, has poor-looking homes, streets that are, potholes and all of that stuff versus another neighborhood, which seems much more affluent, and you notice that, people who look like this live in that neighborhood, people who look very different look in that neighborhood. What sense does a child or you as an adult make of that? That's the conversation to have.
Up next, more with Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas from Embrace Race will tell us how their vision of working towards a multiracial democracy will expand in 2025.
And later, the Broadway makeup designer who created the makeup for Wicked, Joe Dulude II, will teach me the proper ploys when I talk to boys, little ways to flirt and flounce. He'll show me what shoes to wear, how to fix my hair, everything that really counts to be popular, and also to be Elphaba and Glinda on the march for the food bank next week.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by the UMass 5 College Credit Union, offering co-op advantage checking with cash back on all purchases, plus secure debit card controls, all from the UMass 5 mobile banking app. Insured by NCUA, umass5.coop.
We're speaking with Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas, who are the co-directors of Embrace Race, which has a podcast and a resource landing page that has a bunch of articles and books that you can direct people to apart from just the podcast.
The two of you have spent years dedicated to this theory, but podcasts are kind of tidbits of information, like super truncated, very small, short form. How hard was it to really curate what you needed to say about these myths into something that was easily digestible for someone in podcast form?
I'm glad you found it so. We're pleased with it, actually.
Yeah.
I mean, what we had to do is say, as in all media, like this is it's a funnel. You need to sort of get people in somewhere where they are, and we really can point people to a deeper understanding we hope that they look for more information after the podcast.
We're speaking with Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas, who are the co-directors of Embrace Race, which has a podcast and a resource landing page. And as we mentioned at the beginning, you also have a relationship with the Mead Art Museum in Amherst. Tell us about that relationship.
So, yeah, we're so excited about it. They opened the big exhibit last week. They had a little party on Saturday, which was super fun. Yeah, it was such an honor. They came to us. We have a curriculum called Drawing Differences, which was born out of noticing that our own kids, who, I'm black and white, multiracial, Andrew is black, our own kids were drawing mostly white characters. And we talked to them a lot about race. We try to listen. I try to shut up and talk to them about stuff. And we noticed that and thought that's interesting. That's something we haven't been paying attention to. And then we spoke to a lot of teachers and parents, and across the board, people were saying, yeah, kids are drawing themselves white, even if they're kids of color sometimes, or lighter than they are, or, if they're white kids, mostly people are just drawing white people. And I remembered back to my own childhood of, the sort of ubiquitous peach crayon and, drawing my own multi-hued family.
Or it used to be called flesh colored.
Right,
Yes.
right. So I drew my own family as all sort of peach, and we didn't look like ourselves,
Yeah.
So I was trying to think, how do we address this, and how do we even address it locally? And I spoke to Grace Lynn, who you all,
Yes.
who's amazing, and and has done
Author, children's book author, illustrator, highly decorated, fabulous human being.
amazing and supporter of this work. And I said, Grace, could we do a workshop where we teach kids how to draw kids of color? And she was like, hold the phones. How exactly would you teach a kid to draw a black person? Like, you're going to fall on racial visual stereotypes, right? So what you really should do is draw one person at a time and encourage people to draw across the color line and to draw themselves, if they haven't been drawing themselves. And she herself had the story of not drawing herself or not drawing non-white people until she got to RISD.
Wow.
And was forced to draw herself, and she brought on these two amazing to a webinar we had. She brought on Ogi Mora, who's a great illustrator and writer as well, and Juji Morales, who's also great, and they talked about having the same experience. Illustrators, writers of color who didn't do that at first. And so we had them on, they spoke about it, and they drew each other and talked about how that felt. So that was the inspiration for this Drawing Differences curriculum that we ended up building with the Embrace Race team and with anti-racist art teachers. You can follow them on Instagram. And the Mead found that and said, wow, these affirmations that it's organized into, we observe closely, we see color, we see individuals, we feel seen. This feels like, in our exhibit, what is born out of it really is their own thing, but really hews closely to our intent, which was to to have people do all of those things, watch closely, look closely at others and draw them, all of which you can do at the Mead, and have the conversations about it with your kids in an intergenerational context. So it's kind of amazing what they've done.
You know, we've paid a lot of attention in recent years to what kids consume. So in terms of books, for example, right? And, you know, a diversity of characters in the books that they're reading and what they're watching.
It's still very low, says someone who wrote a children's book about a black person.
Yeah, no, it's still low.
Pick up Sir Morian about the Black Knight of the Round Table, co-written by Khalees Smith and Holly Black.
And it's really, in children's book publishing, it's only changed in the last couple of years. We've paid some attention to that. What we haven't done is paid little or any attention to what kids are actually producing themselves. Mm-hmm. And what if you could both encourage them, as Melissa says, to draw across the color line, and knowing that some conversations, some questions are going to come up in the course of doing that, right? If they're working with an educator or a parent, how can you support the parents, right, to have and manage those conversations when they come up?
You have this collaboration at Amherst. You've got a podcast coming out of all the resources that you've been putting together for a decade now. What projects are on the horizon?
In addition to season 2 of the podcast, you know, we organize our work more generally around 3 strategic pillars, as we say. So resource building, right? What do I do and why do I do it? Community building. So who else is doing this work? Because it's not enough, right? So the classic comparison is, I want to stop smoking, I want to go to the gym, I want to eat right, whatever it may be. It's almost always really helpful to have a partner, at least one partner in that work. And then the third thing, though, is the thing I want to emphasize, field building, right? So how do we get not just the frontline people, the educators and the parents, for example, but the researchers whose work will help generate the interventions the rest of us need, the children's media folks, of course, who are coming out with content that really matters, that kids will be consuming, that will make it easier or harder for parents, educators, others to do their work, the health professionals, right? What if we had pediatricians who, as a matter of course, in their interaction with families and with kids, talked freely about race and racism and what impact that might be having in kids' lives, because we know it has impact. So that's the one, we're going to have a convening in May of 300 leaders from across the country. And the question is, can we really sort of add some juice to the effort to build a field?
It's the first national convening on children's racial learning.
Wow.
It's the first national, and we hope it will be a recurring thing. After George Floyd was murdered, that was a before and after moment for us, right? Mm-hmm. So we went from being, we're still very small, but we're less small than we used to be. Mm-hmm. We got, what for us was a significant amount of money. Our audience grew. Because people came looking, people were inspired by that event and what it said about the country and race. That allowed us to hire our staff, which is now 7 strong. Over the last 4 years, since Floyd's murder and the Black Lives Matter protests and so on, we have generated a ton of content, right, that we think is really good. But, our purpose isn't to generate great content, right? Our purpose is to have it be used so that it changes behavior of a lot of people. And that's much harder, given our skill set, than generating great content. Mm-hmm. So that's another very practical challenge we hope to be really leaning into over this next year and more.
It's such an exciting project. It's such a great podcast in its first season. I can't wait to hear what comes out in the second season. And I'm kind of thrilled that it comes out of Western Massachusetts.
It does.
In Amherst, and with such strong connections to the Valley. Melissa Giroux and Andrew Grant Thomas, who are the co-directors and co-hosts of the Embrace Race podcast and Embrace Race. A lot of these resources that we've talked about that are available to you are on their website at embracerace.org. And I'm sure you can find the podcast, as they say, wherever podcasts are available.
Khalees and Monty are a role model.
Come on
now.
I want to give a shout out, though, to Graham Griffin, who helped to launch our show and has been a behind-the-scenes partner for your podcast, too. Gigi.
He's awesome.
We love him. And we love you guys. We love the show. So thank you for putting
I love your show.
We love your show.
You know what?
We love your show more.
Shut off our show now and just listen to their show.
Up next, Monty gears up for the Food Bank March and greens up with Mr. Drag himself, the Broadway makeup designer behind Wicked, Joe DeLude II.
You're listening to the Fabulous 413 on 88.5 NEPM.
The Fabulous 413 podcast is funded by Northeast Solar, helping customers make the switch to solar for savings, energy security, and tax incentives. Learn more at northeast-solar.com. NEPM's podcasts are funded by Armbrook Village, offering research-based arts, music, fitness, and lifelong learning programs at their assisted living and Alzheimer's care community in Westfield. armbrookvillage.com.
I probably should have pumped gas before I was going to have green all over my face. Freak everybody out going to the... I am at the Pawtucket, Rhode Island studios of Joe DeLude II, who, if they had a Tony Award for makeup on Broadway, Joe would have won 10 of them by now.
Well, probably.
Joe...
I said I'm going to win posthumously. That's what I'm going to
You're going to get a Lifetime Achievement, Tony.
Yeah, I'm dead.
No, they'll give you one before you're dead, I hope.
I doubt.
Joe DeLude II is formerly of Greenfield, Massachusetts. You lived in Greenfield for how long, Joe?
In Greenfield, I lived for 4.5 years, and in Northampton, I lived for 4 years.
So you had a long history.
I've got to grab some other foundation.
Okay, I'll give his backstory while he's grabbing more makeup. He has a long history and connection to Western Massachusetts, including being best buddies with Angela DiTerlizzi, now the New York Times best-selling children's book author, who also used to do makeup, as well as with Laurie Holmes Clark, who's part of the Clarkdale Fruit Farm family, who was in the touring company of Wicked when it first went on tour. Because I'm doing Elphaba and Glinda for the March for the Food Bank next week, it seemed only appropriate that the person who would show me how to do the makeup properly is the person who created the makeup and once again should have won a Tony for it if there was such a thing, my buddy Joe. Worth the 2-hour drive to come and get Galinda-fied. So right now, you're applying foundation?
Yes.
You're going to tell me what types of makeup I need to get to do this?
Sure.
Tell us how you got involved in the world of Broadway makeup, Joe.
I fell into it. Happened to be at the right place at the right time. I had left New York. I was living in LA, and a friend of mine was doing a teaser for a film. And we were doing a weekend in New York. So he paid for me to go to New York. And then while I was there, I figured I would do some work. And I was working for E! Entertainment Television and the Style Network when it still existed. I was doing some of their hosts. My friend Kate Best, who's Vanessa Williams' makeup artist, texted me, and she needed to take some time off, and she wanted to know if I could come and cover for her. So I said yes. It was supposed to be for 2 shows. 2 shows turned into 8 shows, and then she called me and said, "Will you come and take over for me? I don't want to do this anymore," because she's a celebrity makeup artist, so she didn't want to work 8 shows a week in a dirty, disgusting theater. Then I moved back to New York, took over for her on Into the Woods. And Susan Hilferty was the costume designer for that. And I found out she was doing Wicked, and I loved the book. I had read it twice. And so I said, I would love to work on it, meaning just do the makeup for it. And then she called me to come in to interview to design the show.
So you'd never designed makeup for Broadway before, and all of a sudden you have now designed, I think in the last century, what would be more iconic makeup than the makeup of the Green Witch of Elphaba, for sure.
It's true. It's kind of funny. And what's funny is that neither of us closed for me. None of us knew that Wicked was going to be as big a success as it is. I have said this many times, it's not my favorite musical. So, and of course you're starting a new musical, you never know if people are going to like it or not. Mm-hmm. We did our out of town in San Francisco, and the show was 3 hours and 15 minutes long. So a lot got cut. But when we heard the reaction of the crowd, then we were kind of like, oh, I think this is going to be good. I think people are going to like it. And look at it now, it's everywhere.
Yes, it is.
I mean, we've been waiting forever for the film.
I know.
Kristen Chenoweth had a really great comment where she was like, I'm just glad it happened while I was still alive.
Now, you are doing my makeup right now as Glinda.
Yes.
You put on the foundation. What was that powder you put on second?
Just a pressed powder. And so then I did a really light eyeshadow all over your lid. I'm kind of making this part up because I just redesigned the Glinda makeup this year. So I had already redesigned the female ensemble, the female presenting ensemble, I should say, because it was dated. I designed it in 2003, and it was based on editorial makeup of 2003. Mm-hmm. When we came back from the pandemic, I went to see the show to check on it and make sure everything looked okay, and I was like, oh, I was like, this looks awful. Look up for me. this you might want to find someone to do this for you.
I think I'm going to have to wake up my 17-year-old Enzo,
Probably.
who has done this many times.
Yeah, eyeliner is a really tough one. When I do Mr. Drag, I do a very, very thick eyeliner so that I don't have to worry about being as super precise as this is.
Speaking of Mr. Drag, that's coming back to the Shea in the holidays. We'll have you on closer to that to talk more specifically about that
Yes.
show. But that's been a fun ride over the years. Mr. Drag is your stage performance handle.
Mm-hmm. And this year's show is going to be even sillier and more ridiculous than it has been in the past. So
I'm getting made up as Glinda in the Pawtucket, Rhode Island studios of former local hero from Northampton/Greenfield, Broadway makeup designer and stage and screen makeup designer. You did Don't Look Up and a bunch of other movies that people have seen as well. Joe Duluth II. So you've designed this for Wicked, and
you can open now.
Kristen Chenoweth and the wickedly talented Adele Dazeem. Idina Menzel. You worked directly with them, made them up for Broadway. Besides me, which was your favorite Elphaba and Glinda? Or do you play favorites?
That's a tough question to ask. Just look down and over that way. I mean, there's elements of different people that I've loved. And it's funny, I've pretty much, with all the ones that I worked on, because I look over this way, pretty much have almost stayed friends with all of them. But yeah, there's like different things that I like about different performances. Like with, for example, Anna Gasteyer. I loved how awkward she was and so uncomfortable when she played Elphaba, like in the first act, and I had never seen that before in an Elphaba. So it was really cool to see like a different take on it, and I really love like how each actor will bring something different to the role.
I should wear makeup all the time.
You still look really good in makeup. And then my least favorite product.
Uh-oh, glitter. It's the herpes of the craft world.
It is. And that's basically your Glinda.
Woo!
Simple.
Maybe I should put my wig on and see how it looks.
Yep. A little low for your hairline?
I don't have a hairline.
Well, if you had a hairline, it would be low for it.
Toss, toss.
Toss, toss.
That's one.
That's one. Okay, we are now going right over the Glinda with Elphaba.
So, before you put on the green, you want to put on the foundation just like you did for Glinda, and then you just take one of these big brushes.
So you have a big paintbrush like you would paint a wall with.
No, this is called a hake brush. It's Japanese.
Uh-huh.
So it's not, you wouldn't paint a wall with this, but they would use it in like Japanese calligraphy and art and things like that. So
But it's a big brush is what I'm saying.
It is a big brush because you want to cover a wide area.
Here comes the green. Fast and furious all over the dome. I'm like a tabula rasa without hair, though. That must make your life somewhat easy.
It is actually easy because I don't have to worry so much about a hairline and getting it into a hairline.
You just go for it. There is no hairline. We're unlimited.
I went for Halloween this year for the first time as Elphaba.
Really?
So I had never done that before. So I had done myself up in green for a photo series that I had started when I first moved to Northampton. This one, because I wasn't sure if I was going to keep the hat on all night, I painted my entire head because now it's shaved into a mohawk, and so I painted all the sides, so I was green all over.
I currently look like some sort of Frankenstein's monster or the mask that Jim Carrey wears in The Mask. But I am green, and it'll do fine.
It's beautiful, and I think it's what I want to be.
The good thing is that because I have so much of this is yours to keep.
Woo! Real Elphaba green from the real designer of Wicked.
And the brush, too. What I started doing is, and also because what ended up happening is when you have people with different skin tones, and now we've had, black Elphabas as well, where we have to adjust and do different colors and stuff, because a lot of times this green will just show up ashy on them.
Mm-hmm.
But even with some other people, like olive skin tone, it started reading weird.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when we started doing the green more full strength. So this is the same product that drag queens use. It's a TV paint stick from Krylon, because if they're going to be dancing and sweating, they want to make sure that it's not going to move. What I'm doing on you is kind of what I do mostly on every Elphaba. So just kind of down the nose, under the eyes, onto the forehead a little bit. If you think you're going to be like really sweaty under that wig, then I would say like just go all over your forehead.
I think there's a good possibility that will be the case.
Yeah.
Look at how soft and green I look.
Yeah. It's amazing.
Who was the person that you made up that you were most intimidated to be making up when you were making them up?
I've rarely been starstruck. The one person I was very starstruck by was Sybil Shepherd because I loved moonlighting as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
And I used to have pictures of her up on my wall. So she came in and there was a moment where I lost my breath for a moment. Because it's something that growing up, I never even imagined. Watching Valley of the Dolls, never once imagined that I would meet Patty Duke and that we would become really good friends. So there's that moment where you're like, oh, this is happening. But most of the time I'm not. Sometimes I get nervous because I know people have certain ideas in their heads of what they want to look like. And I'm designing a makeup for a show and for a character, and some actors don't always recognize that. And I love collaborating with actors. I love hearing their ideas, but as long as it serves the story. This is basically your lip color. Lips were the hardest thing for me to learn how to do. Throw it close for me. Throw some of that on the eyelid. This is your glamour.
There we have it.
There you go.
I've been greenified.
Greenified.
I look like my sister and my mom if they were green. Well, thank you, Joe. This has been great.
You're welcome.
I know that this is as good as I'm going to look. I'm just soaking it in, and I can't wait to drive back to the valley in full green and see how people react, especially when I pump gas.
They're not going to think anything of it because the movie's out now, so they're just going to think that oh, he probably went to go see the movie.
Yeah, they'll just think I'm a super fan. It's going to be a lot to walk in for 26 miles in green,
I know.
too.
Hey, I walked in heels for a mile that year. So.
You did. You are the only person. How high were those heels?
3 or 4 inches. I think 4.
Yeah, that Mr. Drag, a mile in heels from the end of the border between Deerfield and Greenfield to the end. That was brave.
I mean, to be fair though, walking in heels isn't the problem. It's standing still in heels is the problem.
Well, luckily we're moving most of the time.
Yeah. So you'll be...
On the next Fabulous 413, we head to Lenox to hang out with kids embracing the Bard. Live Music Friday brings Valley staple Lux Deluxe to the studios to celebrate the release of a new album and an upcoming show at the Iron Horse to boot.
And 'tis the season of Beaujolais, and the folks at Dare Bottle Shop and Provisions are more than ready for the occasion. I'm Monty Belmonte.
I'm Khalees Smith.
We'll see you tomorrow on the Fabulous 413.